Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, my co-host Bandu Nair.
Good evening.
On this evening of presidential debates, it may just be the two of us talking back and forth, but I suspect we can manage that okay.
Feel free to call in if you like, though. This is a momentous, historic debate, and these guys have significant stances on drug policy reform as well, so we can inform you on that.
And the phone number is on the screen, so if you're not watching the debate, or even if you are, give us a call. Been a thing or two of interest in the news lately worth commenting on. The ONDCP released a statement that in California, Mexican syndicates growing marijuana in the national forest and on public lands were doing extensive environmental damage with chemical runoff, with discarded pipes and buckets. Gee, you know, I do wish those people would read a little history sometime. If they go back and look at alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, the bootlegger stills dumped all sorts of pollutants into the streams, left barrels, everything out in the environment, set up booby traps even. Jack Daniels doesn't do that. When we looked at the establishment of the illegal cocaine cookeries in Colombia in the 70s and 80s, one of the problems there was that they were dumping solvents and other pollutants into the streams rather than disposing of it. The pharmaceutical companies that manufacture legitimate cocaine are under environmental protection laws, and they don't do that. When they forced legal amphetamines off the market and meth started showing up, the illegal meth cookers caused great small environmental damage where they were cooking, something that the regulated, legitimate manufacturers never did. You know, there's pollution occurring around the marijuana plantations, but that's another one of the collateral prices of the irrational drug laws. It's part of that collateral price the government will not admit it's forcing us to pay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, and speaking of, those are environmental damages that may occur because of the people who are growing it illicitly. What about the people who are countering it, such as the U.S. government in Plan Colombia, causing spraying crops overhead too high to avoid any type of gunfire or anything, but also too low that they're affecting legal cash crops for local farmers. They're affecting birth rates and birth defects in children in those outerlying areas. And that's Plan Colombia, which was initiated in the late 1990s, mid-1990s. Now they're planning.
And they're wanting to do that in Afghanistan. Luckily,
as well.
The military has resisted it.
Exactly. Well, right now there's talks of, and I think it's pretty much passed, is the Plan Mexico, the Merida initiative. And so we're going to have the same effect there. It's going to be completely non-effective, and of course, taxpayers are paying for it, but now another country is paying for it. And not only that, but it's affecting legal cash crops as well. And this may very well be a lucrative market for the local farmers there. As far as Afghanistan goes, Obama put it pretty nicely. I don't know if it was during the campaign, I'm sure it was much beforehand, but he was basically saying that we need to send technical agricultural experts in order to show them how to grow a different crop, because this is how they are making money, whether it's terrorists or local farmers.
And that won't do any good.
Exactly. It seems like a small incentive for farmers when they can be making millions of dollars.
Well, they don't make millions. But with a small tract of a few acres, they can support a family on poppies. That same tract is enough so that they can starve to death growing any kind of normal crop. Now, one of the
No one's going
ironies,
to pay them that much for it.
yeah, one of the ironies is, at the same time we've got the illegal poppies being grown in Afghanistan. A few months back, the legal opium poppy growers in India, who grow poppies for the medicinal market, were complaining and threatening to go on strike because the acreage restrictions and the price limits they were under were not allowing them to make a living growing legal poppies.
Wow.
So it's
It just goes to show you the big difference between a legal and a black market trade.
is price.
Yeah.
That's
exactly
like
the
the Merida initiative with what, that whopping, is it 1.6 billion we're sending to Mexico there? That will go about that far in combating the 20 million we're sending to the drug traffickers, which is what fuels that civil war in the first place. Legalize the cocaine, pull that 20 billion a year out of the Mexican economy, and I'm not saying that the violence will go away because it's been there for 150 years, but it would certainly go way, 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 way down.
Right. If you pull out money that drug cartels are able to have, you know, they're having the effect of, they're not just going from, oh, these horrible Pablo Escobars and everything, they're becoming kind of the Robin Hoods of society, and they're funding now schools and churches and everything. So they're completely enmeshed in society, and
If
we're
you've
helping
listened
that
to
along.
if you've listened to any Norteño music in the last 20 years, the corridos, the ballads of Norteño music, have pretty well glamorized the traffickers, just like American folk music glamorized Pretty Boy Floyd and Jesse James and some of our own local outlaws. It happens, yeah.
Right. So, well, what can be done about it? A new think tank report from a British organization founded by the Beckley Foundation issued the Global Cannabis Commission report. It was a 10-year study starting in 1998 on the activity and control of illegal drug use in markets. Their initial predictions was pretty correct, that no enormous progress is going to be made in the 10 years from when the study started until now. But they had a few great questions that we constantly ask on this show, and some of the same answers, but they've got a few numbers behind them, which is pretty interesting. First of all, the estimate of how many people in the world have tried drugs at some point is a very conservative, and I do believe this is a very conservative estimate of 160 million people. If you look at that, that's about 2% of the world population, about 6 billion right now.
That's probably not too far off. Now, part of it is how they define drugs. If they're excluding alcohol, that pushes the number way down. If they're excluding some of the native, natural farm psychedelics and hallucinogenics that some of the hunter-gatherer tribes use, that pushes the number way down. If they're including GOT in Eastern Africa or not, in other words, if they count opiates, cocaine, amphetamines, marijuana, they get one number. If they include all of the psychoactive substances people ingest, they're going to get a very different number.
Yeah, exactly. If they included alcohol and caffeine, they'd have a much higher number. But I do believe, since this report was specifically on illegal drug use, this is the numbers we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So that leads us to the fact that, especially in this last year, first of all, the U.S. is averaging 750,000 people incarcerated per year for drug charges. This year, I believe it was something like 870,000. So we're blowing their numbers away.
870,000 last year was the total number arrested on marijuana charges. I'm not sure what the number actually incarcerated for all drug charges.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant arrested.
But that would be about 1.5 million probably incarcerated on all drug charges.
And so one of their big questions was, wouldn't the legalization of cannabis pave the way to legalization of all drugs? And furthermore, wouldn't it also pave the way for an inherently increased amount of drug users? Now, their answer was, no matter what the relative harm may be compared to cigarettes or whiskey, of the relative harm of marijuana, of course. A move to end prohibition would, of course, be opposed by the opponents of liberalizing drug laws, but however, individual use and individual increasing use or individually pertaining in this activity really depends more not just on the policies in place, but on your culture, like the cultural values that of your environmental factors and your socioeconomic factors.
Well, I might say something else there too. Over the past 4 or 5 years or so, the Colombian growers have been shifting quite a bit of their cocaine out of the Mexico pipeline into the U.S. and instead sending it through Brazil and Nigeria into Europe, simply because the American market is saturated. They were running into oversupply, driving the prices down. Right now, according to Gedman's study, marijuana is the #1 cash crop in the United States. It's something that can be grown locally almost anywhere. The legal penalties for mere possession are low enough. I suspect we've got nearly a saturated market there. Legal or unlegal possible penalties, actually even radical differences in price seem to have practically nothing to do with the level of drug consumption.
Well, there is a sort of supply and demand, as you mentioned, and where does that demand come from? But let's see. We've got one of the questions they ask is, why does the report suggest that cannabis should be legalized in the first place? This is something we were kind of talking about beforehand, of comparative deaths per year based on drug. And, of course, they're comparing alcohol and tobacco, whereas alcohol and tobacco, there's 150 deaths per year, and this is in the UK. This is nothing to say for the US, which has a much larger population. But that there's 150 deaths per year compared to, and in the study they say 2. Now I want you to describe the one case that you said earlier.
I suspect one of those 2 cases was one that appeared in England 3 or 4 years ago, in which a teenage boy died. A non-medically trained elected coroner held an inquest and found that the cause of death was overdose of cannabis. No one knows where he got the basis for that. The autopsy was later redone and reviewed by medical doctors, and they said cannabis had nothing to do with it. So, since that's the only one I'm aware of where there has been a so-called official claim of a cannabis-caused death, and it's been pretty well debunked, I don't know where the other one came from.
Right. They don't make any mention of it. But someone on one of the top list groups here in Houston had asked a pretty pertinent question relating to that environmental issues of sullying all the forests and polluting the areas where illicit fields are in the U.S. And she had asked, the real question is, how can we tell if there are any toxins in what you may get? And of course that goes back to, well, if we had a regulated market, if we had ways of intervening, if we had ways of bringing this to a pharmaceutical company or something, we would be able to know.
Not just a pharmaceutical company.
Any type of business or any type of agricultural industry.
If you go into the supermarket and buy broccoli, do you eat it without any question? Yeah. We've had some problems of contaminated vegetables coming through the food chain, but pretty much our controls and regulations for growing of food, our inspection process for getting it to market works pretty well. If marijuana were treated like broccoli, we wouldn't have much worry.
Right. Because there's no way you can wash your marijuana before you try to use it.
Well, you could, yeah.
Wouldn't be very effective for a few days. But yeah, so their conclusion is and I think this is very succinct and very just where we need to go with this, is in an alternative system of regulated availability, market controls such as taxation, minimum age requirements, labeling, and potency limits are available to minimize the harms associated, if any, are associated with individual cannabis use.
Well, let me throw something else into the mix here. Several years ago when he was president, Jimmy Carter made the statement that the harm done by drug laws should not exceed the harm they're trying to prevent. Mm-hmm. We just mentioned the fact that last year 870 some odd thousand people were arrested for marijuana crimes. We have said that no one has ever died from the use of marijuana, yet of those arrested, those that go into jail or prison, at about a 30 to 40% rate across the United States, become infected with either hepatitis C or HIV while they're in jail. Now, it looks to me like this is a case where the marijuana law is much more deadly than the marijuana. The producer tells me it's time to take a break. We'll see you back in a few minutes.
Hello, welcome to MPP TV. I'm Noah Brzezinski with the Marijuana Policy Project. This is our first ever marijuana policy presidential candidate video voters guide. On November 4th, the United States will elect its 44th president. In this video, we will show you some of the statements made by the candidates on issues related to marijuana policy. In 2004, Barack Obama said the following regarding the war on drugs.
In terms of legalization of drugs, I think that the battle, the war on drugs has been an utter failure, and I think that we need to rethink and decriminalize our marijuana laws. But I'm not somebody who believes in legalization of marijuana. What I do believe is that we need to rethink how we are operating in the drug wars, and I think that currently we are not doing a good job.
And while Senator Obama, the Democratic nominee, has backed off considerably from that position regarding decriminalization, he has been candid about his own past use.
I have to ask this question. Remember, Senator, you are under oath. Did you inhale?
Well, you know, I was telling somebody asked this question. I said that was the point.
On medical marijuana, Obama said the following in Iowa last year.
My attitude is if the science and doctors suggest that the best palliative care, the best way to relieve pain and suffering is through medical marijuana, then that's something that I'm open to. Because there's no difference between that and morphine when it comes to just giving people relief from pain. But I want to do it under strict guidelines. I want to make sure that it is prescribed in the same way that other painkillers or palliative drugs would be prescribed.
In response to a question about how, as president, he would approach the issue of arresting medical marijuana patients, the senator has been upfront.
I would not have the Justice Department prosecuting medical marijuana. It's not a good use of our resources.
An Obama spokesperson has also said that Obama supports the rights of states and local governments to make this choice, though he believes medical marijuana should be subject to U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulation, like other drugs. Republican nominee Senator John McCain has been quite clear about his opposition to medical marijuana. He is in no way supportive of its use medicinally, but he has told individuals on the campaign trail he does not advocate or support federal raids that involve the arresting of actual medical marijuana patients.
I'm just really scared if I'm going to be put in jail for trying to keep weed on my body or using it for anything.
Well, sir, I just want to assure you I'll do everything in my power to make sure that you will never have the threat of that happening to you. You shoot every shred of evidence that I have, including talking to the best minds in the world, to say that there are many other ways to relieve pain and suffering, and I would be glad to look into your particular case.
Next is former Congressman Bob Barr, the Libertarian nominee for president. Congressman Barr has recently become outspoken on the issue of the federal war on drugs and made the following comments in a June 2008 interview with Mob TV.
Why should libertarians believe you now?
Government has taken so much power and is exercising so much power over our lives in an unprecedented degree that it's caused myself and I think a lot of other Americans to sit down and say, let's hold on just a minute here. So what 9/11 and the way government has taken power to itself in such an unprecedented manner since 9/11 has in fact caused me to go back and take a very hard look at a number of areas such as the drug war and medicinal marijuana in particular that I was willing to let government regulate and let government control in years past, but we can't do it any longer. And the job of myself as Libertarian nominee for the presidency is to address these issues not as emotional issues. It's not about people using pot. It is the issue of whether or not we want a federal government that is so powerful and so pervasive that it can go into your home and tell you what you should be doing in the privacy of your own home.
Independent candidate Ralph Nader has been outspoken over the years on his positions with regard to marijuana and the war on drugs. In an interview with the Drug War Chronicle in 2004, candidate Nader declared, quote, "Marijuana is the drug that should most clearly be brought into a system of regulation and taxation. It is less dangerous than drugs like alcohol and tobacco as far as addiction and death. Regulation and taxation would provide greater control over purity, potency, labeling, health warnings, and age restrictions than the ineffective current war on marijuana approach." Former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney is the Green Party nominee for president. According to the Green Party's official website, the 2008 Green Party platform includes the following plank. We, the Green Party, call for decriminalization of victimless crimes, for example, the possession of small amounts of marijuana. We call for legalization of industrial hemp and all its many uses. We call for an end to the war on drugs. We support expanded drug counseling and treatment. We hope you consider yourself a little better informed on the issue. I'm Noah Brzezinski with the Marijuana Policy Project. For more information about marijuana, prohibition, and legalization, please check our website, MPP-TV, at tv.mpp.org. Thanks for watching.
You're watching the Drug Crime and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
You may want to call me cynical or just obstinate, but I'm unwilling to believe that someone that was as irrational and extreme a hardline drug warrior as Bob Barr has totally changed his spots. I believe it when I see it happen, but I'm sorry, the man has no credibility with me at all.
The man has no credibility in that sense, but as we just saw in that disclaimer, he did work with MPP in order to try to overthrow his own legislation, which is still in power and still in act. So, I don't know. I am very cynical of it as well, but I do believe that people can change in their minds and hearts, whether it's a publicity stunt or not.
So,
yeah.
But I will say this about the election. This is a horrible example of counting chickens before the eggs have been laid, let alone hatched. But it's beginning to look as if there's not much doubt about the presidential election. Down ballot races, especially some local races, are crucial this year for drug reform. There are at least two bills that will be pending in the House Hinchy Warbach on exemptions for medical marijuana, Barney Frank's bill on decriminalization of marijuana, there's a good chance that proper voting could give an extremely strong Democratic majority in both houses that would make those more susceptible of passage. In Austin this year, I'm sure we'll see probably 3 or 4 attempts to liberalize the drug laws. The Democratic Party in Texas has at least an outside chance of taking a majority in the House, which would mean a totally different set of committee chairpersons and a speaker, which could make extreme differences in outcomes for some of this legislation. On the local level in Harris County, for the first time in ages and ages and ages, there are contested races for district attorney, for sheriff, for county attorney, for county judge, and all of these, particularly the district attorney and the sheriff's office, these are jobs that have strong policy effects on laws, and particularly drug laws, and the candidates have expressed strong differences on these issues. So I think this is a year that, at least as far as I'm concerned, instead of being a concerned citizen and looking at the overall picture, this may be the one time that you want to be a single issue voter, look at these races from the standpoint of what you think it will do for the drug laws, and in 2 years you can go back to being a concerned all-around citizen. That's as near as I'm going to come to making a recommendation this year.
That's a good idea, and we can go into a little bit on how our actual large candidates on the big presidential election, how they stand. If people are sick watching the debates and you want to hear a little bit more about the candidates, though, not from them. Well, we've got, first of all, Obama and McCain's stance on federal raids, dealers, medical marijuana users in states that have legalized medical marijuana. Obama's position from before and now has always been that he wouldn't use federal funds on raids in the 12 states where medical marijuana has been legalized, which is, in effect, the Hinchy-Rohrabacher Amendment, and that would be a great addition to drug policy reform and just the people in those states who are trying to alleviate their pain and suffering. McCain's position, of course, in April 2007, he said, quote, "I will let states decide that issue." So, but his voting record, it's of course the best way to avoid that question. I think when we went into office, John Culberson said even a more vague way of I'd like to let states decide that issue. But basically, any of McCain's drug issues policy, how he voted, indicates that he would stay the course.
It's a place where doctrinaire conservative Republicans have gotten themselves over a barrel. On the one hand, they have for 40, 50 years been strong states' rights advocates. On the other hand, ever since Nixon, they have been strong anti-crime, lock them up, throw them away, strong drug. So one way or the other, they have to kind of violate the principles. We have a caller.
Oh, fantastic.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Good evening, Buford. This is Clay.
Hi, Clay.
Now, I just wanted to remind everybody about Iran-Contra. Even though that they weren't supposed to be getting money to support things, they were subverting and going around doing things illegal to get the money to do the stuff that they weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
They can still do it here with the raids in California and the like. But I want to talk about another thing. In England, over the weekend, this past weekend, they recriminalized marijuana after they had so many institutes throughout the government, commissions and study groups all saying, no, you should legalize it, regulate it, tax it. Do not make it against the law. Now that the state of England is going to try to put the genie back in the bottle. And I'm of the belief that you're not going to ever do that. Well, I'd like to hear what y'all have to say.
Okay.
Right, thanks.
Go ahead.
Well, I think he's absolutely right. It's just a huge push for another politician to sound hard on drugs. They reclassified it from a Class C back to a Class B, and from what I understand, in order to compensate and get people used to that idea that it's going to be re-legitimized to this, largely illegal, mandatory sentences, they're going to try to impose the maximum fines and maximum sentencing on anyone from now until January 26th.
Oh, of course, that overstates the case a little. Because as a Class C drug, possession of marijuana was still illegal.
But it wasn't as detrimental.
Right. Normally, that would mean if you got stopped by the police, had marijuana, they would confiscate the weed, give you a warning, and you'd go on your
Or was it a ticketable offense like it is in some
Well,
parts
it was a ticketable offense, but the police had the discretion not to even give a ticket.
Exactly. Like the law that's been enacted in Texas, but no one's planning on using it.
No, because the Texas law still has misdemeanor penalties, including 6 months or a year in jail.
And it's still but that law states that it's up to the police officer's discretion of whether to make it
arrest
or throw it away.
depending upon what guidelines the county sets.
Exactly. Which, what is it, only Travis County is enacting that, or no one is?
I believe Travis County, there may be another one or two, but none of the other major metropolitan counties have.
And it's just ridiculous because, do we have another caller?
We've got another break already, so it's time for a break. We'll see you back in a few minutes.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Constipation, diarrhea, dizziness, drowsiness, itching, hair loss, sweating, swelling, thirst, vertigo, inflammation of the lung, kidney disease, congestive heart failure, and headaches. Time's up. The answer, Aleve for headaches.
This week in drug war history, October 17, 1970, President Nixon spearheads the Controlled Substances Act, legislation establishing today's schedules as a means of classifying drugs strictly by their medical value and potential for abuse. October 14, 2003, Supreme Court justices reject the Clinton administration's request, continued by the Bush administration, to consider whether the federal government can punish doctors for recommending or even discussing the use of marijuana for their patients. October 15, 1986, Assistant Attorney General Mark Richard testifies before the Kerry Committee that he had attended a meeting with 20 to 25 officials and that the DEA did not want to provide any of the information the committee had requested on the Contra involvement in drug trafficking. October 17, 2002, Florida Governor Jeb Bush's daughter is sentenced to 10 days in jail and led away in handcuffs after being accused of having crack cocaine in her shoe while in drug rehab. October 20th, 2004, a groundbreaking coalition of black professional organizations come together to form the National African American Drug Policy Coalition. They urgently seek alternatives to misguided drug policies that have led to mass incarceration. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
Good evening, and we're back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics at Houston Media Source. In a short while here, we should have Dean Becker calling in with his update and a short video from him on a DA debate he did recently. In the meantime, some of you may be watching the presidential debates and hearing a lot about economy right now and how much we're suffering, how much more taxes we may or may not have to pay, and I just want to throw some numbers at you for some relative comparison. In the recent Beckley Foundation report that says that, a 10-year study that marijuana should be decriminalized, they found that in the cocaine and heroin trade, the profit margin is anything between 2,000 and 3,000%, which enables organized criminals to turn what are effectively vegetables into commodities worth literally more than their weight in gold.
It also provides them with the necessary cash to corrupt police officers and
Exactly.
police forces all across the country.
All across every country.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
one report where a police officer just admitted to lying in over 150 drug cases
One
over
police
10
officer.
years as serving. They're looking at every case he worked on in his whole career.
Where was this?
The problem is that's not an exceptional case. It's a big case. But in 1999, for instance, the keynote speaker at the National Association of Police Chiefs annual meeting said that police corruption was the biggest problem we faced. In the 20s, over a third of the Bureau of Prohibition got fired or made to resign because of corruption. Roughly the same numbers happened twice to the Bureau of Narcotics, once in the 30s, once in the late 50s. Are you trying to tell me that Dean's on the phone? Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, Buford, this is Dean Becker.
Yeah, I hear we've got part of your DA candidate debate ready.
Right. Have you had a chance to hear any of it yet?
I personally have not listened. Have you, Danny?
I haven't gotten a chance to yet.
Okay,
We're
well,
looking forward to
I'll head this off with a couple of things. One, it's available on, I'll give you the specific website here in just a minute, but it's also available on the Chronicle in the blog section. I posted
Excellent.
in the blog, yeah.
a little piece there. You go to blogs, more readers' blogs.
Yes.
Look down, and at the one or two screens down, it's Crime and Punishment, District Attorney Debate Online.
Okay.
And that will lead you to it. It runs about 48 minutes, and it was quite a an honor really to moderate that debate.
I'm sure it was. Now, this is actually the second time you've had them debate, isn't it?
Well, no, I've had them each on the show individually.
Oh, okay, individually.
They followed each other in May, 1 week after each other, and at that time they agreed to do this, and it took us a couple of months of haggling to pick out a specific day and time, but we did manage to get it done. But let me give you the specific website. It is www.cultural-baggage.com/audio, and I think you have to use a capital A, audio, /debate 101408.mp3, and you can hear the whole thing there. We yesterday, just prior to that, Bradford is a former police chief, and Lykos is a former judge. And just prior to that, I had Judge James P. Gray on my Century of Lies show. Ran from 11:30.
Right, he's the California judge that's been
Superior
rather
Court judge out in
outspoken
Orange
against.
County.
Yeah.
And then also had an interview with Dr. Norm Stamper, who is the former police chief of Seattle. And I'll be honest with you, I was quite happy with the outcome, because I see that whichever one of them gets elected, it's going to be a better scenario than we have now.
Well, I won't argue with you there, Dean, but that doesn't mean I'm very enthusiastic.
Well, and again, I won't go into the details. Some things are not said on the microphone.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it there. But either way, it does look like they both realize we've gone down the wrong trail, at least in some regards, with this drug war. So all I can do is urge folks to get out and vote. We had a Get Out the Vote rally just last week at Dan Electro's for the Truth Network, we called it. Had a fair turnout, raised some money for the station, KPFT, and I don't know, gave folks a chance to get to know one another and work together on what we can do to change these onerous drug laws. Let's see, today I had, as my guest, I had Terry Nelson. He was in town. He's one of the directors of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And we also had a phone interview with Martine Ehrenklau. She's the author of a book, Critical Conditions, The Essential Hospital Guide to Get Your Loved One Out Alive. And we drew a few comparisons between the drug war and the legitimate medical industry, if you will. And there's a really good report on there. Normally my reporter, Glenn Greenway, gives us a international perspective in the war on the opium poppies.
Yeah.
But we had a very personal story of a young woman up in Pennsylvania who has become not a heroin addict, but an occasional heroin user. And
well, there's a big difference there.
there is indeed. And the girl even admitted that because of the objections of her family, she was going to cut back, but not necessarily do away with using it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that we have to train our kids for, because there's always going to be a wild child, one amongst the family, a little black sheep in them, and they're going to do some things that we don't want them to do. But it'd be better if they were prepared through proper education in how to take care of themselves, and it should be even better if there was a regulated marketplace where they wouldn't be buying crap cut with baby powder
or poisons.
Or poison.
You know, Dean, it's not always just the wild child.
Well,
most teenagers experiment, and I know when I was a boy growing up in West Texas, the things that we experimented with were guns, cars, booze, sex, cigarettes, and marijuana.
Well, now,
and of all those, I would worry less about a kid experimenting with marijuana.
And in my case, there was most of the above, and it was waves, and breaking your neck in the surf. That's probably the...
Okay, well, we didn't have those in the desert, but yeah.
But I'm headed to Berkeley tomorrow to attend the. Are you going, Bindu?
I'm not, unfortunately.
Oh, well, I hope to bring you guys back some good tapes you can use on your
sure
program.
Hope so.
Capture some good interviews of what's going on, and maybe some individual sit-downs with some of the folks that are attending.
One thing you might ask about, Dean, and I'm remiss because I didn't find out about this until within the last week or so. But apparently last year, the Japanese company that has licensed Sativex from the Canadian company for marketing in the United States got approval from the FDA and has already started stage 3 clinical testing of Sativex in the United States under an IND. So,
and I think under Bayer Pharmaceuticals, if I'm not mistaken.
It could be, but if you find out something more about that, I'm sure we'd be interested.
Well, I'll get a chance to talk to some of the doctors and scientists. Mitch Earlywine in particular would probably know.
Right.
And I'll see what I can find out from him. But we should have some great stuff to use on your shows and for my radio shows as well. I want to remind folks, if they want to tune into my shows, they air Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I have 2 half-hour shows that air from 11:30 to noon, except during pledge drive, but pay that no mind. And then every afternoon, Monday through Friday at 4:20 p.m., there's a little 3-minute segment we call the 420 Drug War News, and this all is broadcast on KPFT, Kansas Pacific Freight Train, 90.1 FM right here in Houston, and we have approximately 55 stations, U.S., Canada, Australia, and I think later this month in New Zealand. So
you really are becoming worldwide.
That's the goal, Buford. I mean, I work with a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're a group of now more than 10,000 members worldwide who have come to a similar conclusion that drug war is an absolute abysmal failure. And we work together to help bring it to an end, educating the public, encouraging the politicians, and kicking the media in the butt. And I appreciate you guys doing your part to show the media's not always got it wrong.
Well, thank you a lot, Dean. We'll talk to you again later.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was an excellent commentary, and yes, he can be found most days and most weeks on KPFT. And I think, are we going to go to a clip of his and the DA debates that he moderated recently?
This next question, and you addressed it a bit previously, but there is the situation, House Bill 2391, which allows district attorneys to determine whether or not they will arrest and incarcerate people for possession of minor amounts. Your stance in that regard, Chief Bradford?
I think we must take advantage of that opportunity. Only Tarrant County at this point in time has taken advantage of the legislative authority to allow law enforcement officials to issue a citation in the field if someone is in forces or marijuana. I think we take advantage of here. The district meets law enforcement in the area and this aids resource this way. It doesn't pose a threat to the community. The defendant will be still charged with the same offense, subject to the same punishment. It keeps police personnel in the field. If we can get proper identification on the person in the field, do a field check, criminal history check in the field to make sure that they are not a threat to the community and we know who they are, let's do the fiscally sound thing to do and save resources from a law enforcement standpoint and protect the community. So I support it.
And Judge Lykos.
I don't believe it's in Tarrant County. I think it's Travis County that's experimenting with the tickets. With respect to issuing tickets, if the legislature thinks it's appropriate, they can reduce these offenses to Class C offenses. You have over 30 cities in Harris County. They are equipped to set up and write tickets. You also have the JP courts. To come up with tickets for misdemeanor, B and A, and felony offenses would create a logistical nightmare of IT, the Information Technology Group. Then you would have the situation of whether there is bias in arresting or bias in writing tickets. There are many cases right now where there's just a minute amount of drugs where the officers just have them throw it in a ditch and let them go. They would lose that discretion, or waive it rather, and they would write tickets, and then you'd have people with more contact with the criminal justice system. It is very unwieldy at this time in Harris County when crime is rampant to divert resources to something like this that would take... All you got to do is look at the problems that the city of Houston has had and the police department with their tickets and their automatic... the computer system, with their municipal court. That would be a nightmare to occur in Harris County.
May I do a rebuttal on this one?
Yes, rebuttal from...
It would not be wasting resources at all. We're wasting resources now by arresting people who do not pose a threat to the community. They'll be charged with the same offense, subjected to the same crime. The jail is overcrowded because of the situation, just as Judge Lykos is opposing. We're locking too many people up. Let's issue citations in the field, charge them with the same offense, subjected to the same punishment. It's good fiscal utilization of resources.
Judge Lykos?
I'd like to respond to that. I was chair of our Justice Information Management System for 5.5 years. It is a logistical nightmare to create out of whole cloth a system and a program. You know, it's kind of puzzling to me because the chief had an opportunity to join SETSIC, which was set up when I was chair, which is the Southeast Texas Crime Information Center, and chose not to do that. He also chose not to go into the interoperability radio program that we had. These are complex issues, and you do not do it overnight.
Okay, the next question, we'll start with you, Judge Lykos. In the current serology case review that's underway...
Okay, we heard at least their discussion on whether or not to implement the use of citations rather than arrest in misdemeanor cases. I think you got two totally different approaches to the problem from listening to them, and I think probably that those fairly well show the characters of the two people involved.
Mm-hmm. Right, I especially liked Bradford's opinion that we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough police force to be tying them up with these nonviolent offenses and these, piddly offenses that aren't harming anyone else.
Well, on that, whether or not you think the offenses are piddling, remember, even with the citation, someone with more than an ounce of marijuana is still facing 12 months in the county jail. Mm-hmm. The difference is it takes approximately 15 minutes for a police officer to make a stop and write a citation. It takes approximately 3 hours for that same officer to process a non-problematic routine arrest. That means, in effect, that each 4 marijuana cases handled by citation instead of arrest amounts to the equivalent of another full-time patrol officer shift. And you don't have to read the paper very often in this city to know how desperately understaffed the Houston police force is and has been, and from all of their projections will continue to be. A few thousand marijuana arrests every year converted into citations would amount to the equivalent of a substantial number of new patrolmen that we really need. And not only that, those that are arrested sit in the city or county jail while they're waiting either to make bail, which frequently they can't do, or for their trial. And the county government's complaining and asking for over $200 million to build more jails because ours are overcrowded, and we're renting jails in Louisiana now.
Exactly.
I mean, we don't pay public servants to complain about the jobs being too hard. We get public servants who say, "I'll do it."
And handle the situation as need be. Let's hear what Obama and McCain said about decriminalization. Obama's record has been mixed. In 2004, he stated support for opposition. He said both support and opposition to decriminalizing marijuana. He said we need to rethink and decriminalize our nation's marijuana laws. However, now he's kind of become a little bit more ignorant to the cause and everything. And even though he's a very educated and made an intelligent response then in saying that we need to rethink our nation's drug laws, now in his campaign he's saying he's opposed to it. Of course, McCain has always stated that he wouldn't support decriminalizing marijuana. As far as harsh sentencing goes for nonviolent offenders, Obama has indicated that he would give some first-time nonviolent offenders alternatives to serving time in prison. He opposes blind and counterproductive warehousing of drug users, which is a very, very interesting way of putting that. And McCain's position is that he would begin new prison expansion initiatives to cope with the rising number of convicted criminals, including those convicted of drug-related crimes. So he just wants to expand the prisons along with his expanding negative policy that hasn't worked for the last however many years.
In 1900, the federal government did not have a federal prison. The few federal prisoners they had, they put on a cash basis in state prisons. In 1920, as federal alcohol prohibition started, there were about 2,000 federal prisoners. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan became president, there were a total of about 400,000 prisoners total in the jails and prisons of this country. Last year, there were about 2.5 million prisoners, and about 450,000 of those were on drug offenses, more than the total number of prisoners in 1980. If McCain is going to build his way out of the prison mess, he may have solved the current mortgage crisis by simply putting everyone in prison. I mean, it's a fool's errand to chase that dog.
Right, exactly. Pretty soon he'll just have jails everywhere, and that's what we'll live in. But as far as concerning something that's very prevalent on this show and something we talk about a lot, and you guys hopefully are educated on this, is medical marijuana. Obama has stated that when it comes to medical marijuana, I have more of a practical view than anything else. His attitude is that if it's an issue of, quote, doctors prescribing medical marijuana as a treatment for glaucoma or as a cancer treatment, I think that should be appropriate because there really is no difference between that and a doctor prescribing morphine or anything else. And now for McCain's position. Every medical expert I know of, including the AMA, says that there are much more effective and much better treatments for pain than medical marijuana. I still would not support medical marijuana because I don't think that the preponderance of medical opinion in America agrees with the assertion that it's the most effective way of treating pain. Even though the American Association of Family Physicians, the Texas Association of Public Health, American Association of Public Health, Nurses Association, there's so many more that I can't think of off the top of my head.
The main one, the most
but apparently they're not medical
one
experts.
Is the American College of Physicians. I mean, that's
came out with their report. Exactly. So anyways, we've been talking a lot about the Beckley Foundation, and we've been talking a lot about presidential candidates' views on drug policy reform. But for those activists who have been out there for a while and are maybe getting a little bit wary and getting a little bit tired, this is an excellent book to re-stimulate your debate. And it's called Tools After the War on Drugs, Tools for the Debate. I believe it was given out at one of the International Drug Policy Reform Conferences held by DPA, Drug Policy Alliance. And it's by this organization called Transform. And they have been big in the UK for pushing legislation, for bringing these studies to light that we try to bring to you. And I guess their official website is tdpf.org, as in Transform Drug Policy Foundation. And this is just an excellent book. It goes over every talking point. We can read as much as we want, but if you can't put it into layman's terms, then people just close their ears to it. So I thought this was a very interesting read. But we've been throwing out a lot of numbers, and here is a study that came out recently that I had to get a big laugh out of. Now, I guess it was the National Survey on Drug Use and Health from actually two major federal government reports. That one and the treatment episode data set underscore the failure of Bush administration drug policies, stating that not only has ONDCP failed to cut drug use, it's failed to accomplish its missions, but it's also misused treatment stats in order to further their cause and, I don't know, perhaps get more funding or whatever it is they do, because they're certainly not curing the war on drugs. But basically, I guess the one with treatment was the most interesting. What they're indicating is that basically they're saying there's so many people in treatment right now, there's so many people in these federally government-assisted treatment programs that it must be because marijuana is addictive. And this is the classic case of correlation versus causation, because the only reason there's so many people in these treatment cases right now is because it's federally mandated. Like, because of these new policies that they're incurring, you have to go to these treatment options now. And they're saying because there's more people in them, obviously marijuana is getting more potent, therefore it's getting more addictive. Furthermore, these treatment options are paid, the majority of it is paid, I think it was something up to 60 and 62% were marijuana as a primary substance of abuse, and 60% of the admissions referred by the criminal justice system is paid by taxpayer dollars.
Well, we might say on that the next time someone tells you that government funding needs to be cut, that the federal government's spending too much money, why don't you suggest that we start by cutting the probably $50 billion a year spent on the war on drugs?
Exactly. I mean, there's so many ways that we could cut spending. Hopefully one of the big ones is going to be the big war that everyone knows about. But yeah, the war on drugs is becoming definitely a part of people's lives, to the point where even newscasters such as Lou Dobbs is always mentioning it. You know, he's a preponderant amount of times that it sounds that it's almost something that has become in everybody's minds. This is a big waste. Everyone you talk to on the streets realizes this is a big drain.
My editorial tonight is going to be short and sweet. It's the political season, and in the political season, everyone in Texas should pay some obeisance to Molly Ivins. She's not with us anymore, but her sentiments are. I want to remind you that Molly said, vote your heart when you can, vote your head when you must. And in about 3 weeks, either your head or your heart has got to lead you to the polls. We will be back in 2 weeks. Be our last shot before the election.
Exactly.
Do you want the last 30 seconds?
Thank you so much for mentioning Molly Ivins. If only she were alive today, she'd have so much material right now. We'd be laughing our heads off at this calamity of a situation.
Okay.
So, anyways, go out there and vote. And after we've got the right people in office, or whoever you want to be in office, that's when we can start lobbying them again.
And just remember this. It's your government. It's up to you to hire the right people to serve in it. We will leave you now and see